The sky above Vandora was painted with streaks of red and gold as the twin suns began to dip below the horizon. The air was thick with humidity, and the land stretched out in a vast, unforgiving terrain. In the distance, sleek Vandorian ships hovered, their engines humming with a low, mechanical purr, cutting through the endless sky. It was a sight that spoke of power, of progress, and of a civilization that had long since left the struggles of their past behind. But in the midst of this high-tech, space-faring world, one figure stood out. Liam Rios, an ex-soldier from Earth, his boots caked in the dust of a world far from home. He stood tall, with a face weathered by years of battle, his dark eyes scanning the alien landscape. Though his uniform was practical, built for survival and comfort rather than style, there was one unmistakable detail that set him apart from everyone else. The sword. It was a relic from Earth, an heirloom passed down through his family for generations. Its hilt was worn from years of use, the steel blade gleaming faintly under the alien suns. To the Vandorians, it was nothing more than an outdated tool, a symbol of a primitive, bygone era. To them, swords were obsolete, replaced long ago by weapons of unimaginable power, laser rifles, plasma blades, and energy shields. But for Liam, it was more than just a weapon. It was a reminder of who he was, a soldier who had fought and survived, a man whose past was etched into every scar on his body. And today, that sword would be mocked. The Vandorian military base, where Liam had been stationed as part of a peacekeeping mission, was a gleaming complex of silver towers and sprawling landing pads. Soldiers moved with precision, their uniforms sharp and efficient, their faces impassive like machines. Liam felt like an outsider, as if he had been thrust into a world that didn't quite understand him, or worse, didn't care to. When he had arrived, the Vandorian officers had been polite, but their eyes spoke volumes. They saw him as an anomaly, a curiosity from a distant, primitive world. They humored his presence but made it clear that his way of doing things, his old Earth weapons and outdated methods, had no place here. Liam had learned to ignore the whispers, the jokes about his sword, the quiet chuckles behind his back as he passed by. He didn't mind. The sword was his, it was part of him. And though it wasn't the weapon of choice for this world, he knew how to use it better than any modern soldier knew how to use their rifles. But today, the mockery would come to a head. The battle drills were set to begin. The Vandorians had prepared for a simulation of a conflict with an enemy faction, and all soldiers, human and alien alike, were expected to participate. Liam had been briefed by his commanding officer, Commander Jorath, a stern, imposing figure whose disdain for human methods was palpable. "You'll fight alongside our elite soldiers," Jorath had told him, his voice as cold and impersonal as the steel of his armor. "But I must warn you, Earth weapons are obsolete here. You will not be using that ridiculous sword of yours in the simulation, Rios." Liam had nodded. He knew the drill. The Vandorians prided themselves on their advanced technology, their sleek, powerful weapons. They believed that to survive in this universe, one had to evolve to embrace the future. And in their eyes, the past was something to be discarded, to be left behind. And yet here he stood, the last man to hold onto something old, something that had been passed down from generation to generation. A weapon with history, a weapon that had seen countless battles and had never failed its wielder. As the simulation began, Liam stood at the edge of the training field, his sword sheathed at his side. The other soldiers, clad in their high-tech armor and wielding plasma rifles, gathered around. Their faces were unreadable, their eyes cold, accustomed to combat in ways that Liam could never fully understand. Jorath walked toward him, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the sword. "I told you," he said, voice dripping with contempt. "That thing is nothing but a relic. It won't save you out there. You may as well just surrender to the enemy. It'll be over before you can even unsheath it." The other soldiers chuckled quietly, their mockery thinly veiled beneath the hum of their weapons. To them, it was a joke. To them, the sword was an archaic joke. Liam, however, didn't react. He simply nodded and adjusted his grip on the hilt. They didn't know what he was capable of. They didn't know what it felt like to have the weight of history in their hands, to have the knowledge of countless warriors and soldiers guiding every move. His sword was more than just a blade. It was a symbol of everything humanity had fought for, a symbol of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. "Prepare for the attack," Jorath commanded, signaling the start of the simulation. The digital terrain shifted, and the sounds of enemy forces approaching filled the air. The Vandorian soldiers, with their advanced gear and superior firepower, were ready to crush the opposition. But Liam's focus wasn't on the simulation. It was on something deeper. The mockery he had endured had only made him more determined. His sword wasn't obsolete, it was just different, and that was exactly why it was needed. The battlefield was a blur of motion, with plasma beams flashing through the air, and the sound of futuristic weapons firing echoing through the landscape. Liam's movements were fluid, precise. He dodged the first few blasts, then cut down an enemy simulation soldier with a single, graceful stroke. The Vandorian soldiers watched in stunned silence as the figure before them fell, disarmed and defeated. A second soldier charged at him, but Liam was faster. The sword flashed in the air, a blur of movement. With a swift slash, he disarmed his opponent, the weapon clattering to the ground. Jorath stood at the edge of the battlefield, watching in disbelief as Liam cut through the enemy forces with ease. The Vandorians had never seen anything like it. The speed, the precision, the sheer skill, Liam moved like a ghost, a blur of steel and fury. Another soldier, bolder than the rest, came at him from the side. But Liam was already there, his sword already in motion. The soldier barely had time to react before the blade was at his throat, his weapon falling to the ground. Jorath's voice cracked through the comms. "Rios, enough, this is just a simulation, stand down." But it was too late. The battlefield had fallen silent. Liam stood amidst the fallen soldiers, his sword still in hand, its blade gleaming with the remnants of the digital enemy's data. The Vandorians were frozen, their weapons lowered in shock. For a moment, there was only the sound of their breathing, heavy and unsure. Jorath stepped forward, his voice shaking with disbelief. "Impossible," he muttered. You can't." Liam sheathed his sword, his eyes never leaving Jorath's. "Your technology is powerful, Commander, but it's not everything. Sometimes it takes more than just firepower. It takes skill, adaptability, and something you can't program." He paused, his voice growing quieter. "It takes heart." Tension in the air was palpable. Jorath, still in shock, stared at Liam with a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. But before anyone could speak, an explosion ripped through the simulation's landscape. A new, more dangerous enemy had appeared. The simulation wasn't over yet, it had just begun. And this time, it was real. The silence had been broken, and the real test of Liam's strength was about to unfold. The simulation was supposed to be an exercise in strategy and precision, but what had begun as a standard training session quickly descended into chaos. The Vandorian soldiers, accustomed to facing digital enemies that fell easily to their superior weaponry, were unprepared for the sheer force of Liam's blade. His movements, fluid and precise, had made their advanced technology seem clumsy by comparison. Liam's sword was still humming softly in his hand as he surveyed the battlefield. The Vandorian soldiers stood frozen, their weapons lowered, the mockery in their eyes replaced with something far more uncomfortable: uncertainty. Jorath, whose eyes had been sharp with disdain moments ago, was now watching Liam with an unreadable expression. The silence between them stretched long enough to make even the wind feel awkward. Jorath began, his voice shaky but attempting to regain composure. "You can't." Liam cut him off with a sharp motion of his hand. "I don't need your approval, Commander. The battlefield is the ultimate judge, not your technology." Jorath's jaw clenched. The others around him, too, seemed to be grappling with what they had just witnessed. Their eyes darted between Liam and the fallen simulation soldiers, the weight of their mocking words now sinking in. They were supposed to be the superior species, with their advanced plasma rifles, drones, and energy shields. And yet here was a human, a primitive human as they had believed, fighting in ways they hadn't even thought possible. "I told you," Liam said, turning his back to the stunned crowd. "The sword is not obsolete, it's just different." He began walking toward the edge of the battlefield, where the simulation's control panel glowed softly in the fading light. He didn't look back to see if anyone followed. His mind was already thinking ahead, calculating his next move, as it always did in battle. To him, this was nothing more than a fight, a way to prove something, not just to the Vandorians, but to himself. As he reached the control panel, Jorath's voice called out behind him, this time laced with something more dangerous than mockery. "We'll see about that," the commander sneered. "You think this changes anything? You think your sword can defeat real enemies, real technology? The Vandorian High Command will never accept you as anything but a relic, Rios. You're just a curiosity, a broken, outdated warrior. Your sword doesn't change that." Liam's fingers hovered over the control panel, pausing for just a moment before he turned to face Jorath again. "You're wrong. It's you who are blind. This isn't about technology. It's about adaptability. The future isn't just machines and systems. It's people like me who can think, who can survive against the odds. And if you can't see that, then you've already lost. Jorath's lips curled in a tight, frustrated smile. You're delusional. But Liam didn't let his words linger in the air. He walked out of the simulation area, the faint hum of the sword's presence at his side. His mind was already planning his next move, and in the back of his head, a small voice whispered that this was only the beginning. Later that evening, after the simulation's aftermath, the barracks were filled with low murmurs. The Vandorians had returned to their routine, but there was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere. The soldiers who had once laughed at Liam's sword now kept their distance. Some watched him with curiosity, others with caution. It was clear that the human had proven himself in ways they hadn't expected. But it was also clear that none of them, Jorath included, would ever admit it openly. Liam sat in the corner of the room, cleaning his sword with slow, deliberate movements. The soft sheeting of the blade being wiped echoed through the quiet barracks. He wasn't looking for acknowledgement. He wasn't looking for recognition. He was simply doing what had kept him grounded for years, focusing on the task at hand, on the small moments that mattered. A few seats away, Tira Varus, a young Vandorian officer who had watched the battle closely, sat observing him. She had been one of the few to show even a slight interest in Liam from the beginning, though her curiosity had been mixed with skepticism. Now she was watching him intently, as though she was piecing together something she couldn't quite understand. Finally, after a long silence, Tira stood up and walked over to him, her soft footsteps echoing in the otherwise quiet room. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "You really believe in that sword, don't you?" she asked, her voice steady but thoughtful. Liam looked up at her, surprised by the question. Most of the Vandorians had either mocked him or simply ignored his weapon. He met her gaze and nodded slowly. "I do," he said simply. "It's more than just a weapon. It's a part of who I am. It's a piece of my history. And no matter how much technology changes, that doesn't go away." Tira studied him for a moment, her gaze flicking to the sword in his hands. "I've never seen anything like it. I mean the precision, the fluidity. It's—" She trailed off, trying to find the right word. "It's not just about cutting through enemies, is it?" Liam smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "It's about understanding. Understanding yourself, the weapon, the fight. You can't just rely on tech. Sometimes you need to rely on what's inside, your instincts, your heart." Tira seemed lost in thought for a moment. "I never thought I'd hear a human speak like that." "You don't know us, Tira," Liam said softly. "You've only seen what we want you to see. We're not all just primitive, we're adaptable, we're survivors, and we fight for what matters." Tira nodded slowly, clearly still processing his words. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, a realization, perhaps, that humanity had more to offer than the Vandorians had given them credit for. Before she could speak again, a sharp voice interrupted them from across the room. "Officer Varus Rios, report to the commander's office immediately. There's a situation." The tone of Jorath's voice over the comms was cold, his command unmistakable. Something was happening. Liam's instincts flared. The soldiers were already on high alert, preparing for another round of skirmishes, and this time the Vandorians would need every capable soldier they had. The tension in the command center was palpable. The flickering digital maps illuminated Jorath's stern face, his eyes scanning the incoming transmission from their intelligence division. The maps showed areas of deep resistance in Vandora's southern reaches, rebels rising up against the Vandorian elite. The rebellion had been simmering for months, but this new intelligence changed everything. "The rebels are getting organized," Jorath muttered, eyes still fixed on the map. "And they've started using Earth's old technology, swords, old firearms. They're rejecting everything we've taught them." Liam felt a cold shiver run down his spine. This was more than just a few dissidents fighting against the ruling class. The message they were sending was clear. Technology wasn't the be-all and end-all of warfare. There was something about humanity's ingenuity, their adaptability, that made them dangerous. And now, the rebels had tapped into that legacy, using old Earth weapons that had been deemed obsolete, including the sword. Liam's hand instinctively rested on the hilt of his own sword. The very weapon that had made him the subject of mockery and derision was suddenly more relevant than ever. "Commander," Tira spoke up, her voice hesitant. She had been quiet since their earlier exchange in the barracks. "You can't seriously believe they're using swords against us, can you? Even the most skilled warrior can't face our plasma rifles with such primitive tools." Primitive tools? Liam's voice was sharp, cutting through her doubt. You underestimate what a sword can do in the right hands. Tira glanced at him, surprised by the heat in his voice. I didn't mean. Earth's swordsmanship has never been about power, Liam continued, his eyes narrowing. It's about skill and adaptability. Against an opponent who thinks they have the upper hand, a sword can be the most unpredictable weapon there is, especially when they're not expecting it. Jorath finally turned his gaze from the map to Liam. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something, perhaps respect, perhaps begrudging acknowledgement. Perhaps you're right, Rios, but right now this is more than just about fighting with a sword. We need a decisive strategy. The rebels have sophisticated tech, sabotage devices, hacking drones, and they're even manipulating our own systems. Liam stood tall, his mind racing. The conversation had shifted, and it was clear that Jorath was beginning to see the rebels as a more serious threat. Liam had been a part of enough battles to know that the mind behind the weapons mattered just as much as the weapons themselves. We need to take the fight to them while we still can, Liam said, his voice steady. We can't fight them on their terms. We need to hit them where they're vulnerable. Jorath eyed him closely, then nodded almost begrudgingly. Fine, prepare your team. We're mobilizing for a strike on the southern base. It'll be risky, but we'll hit them before they can organize properly. We'll use our technology to our advantage, but I'll take your advice. We'll make sure to include your methods. Liam was about to speak, but Tira cut in, her voice low and firm. Commander, I volunteer to lead the team with Rios. We'll move in quickly, use stealth and... No, Jorath snapped, his gaze hardening. I'll lead the mission. I don't need some human soldier and his ancient weapon to tell me how to fight. There it was again, the familiar dismissive tone. Liam's temper flared, but he kept his expression neutral. He didn't need to prove himself anymore. The battlefield had already spoken. I'll prepare my team, Jorath added, then turned sharply to leave. Tira turned to Liam after Jorath's departure. Her expression was conflicted, but she still looked at him with curiosity, almost as if she were seeing him for the first time. You really think your sword can make a difference against a whole army of advanced tech? She asked, still skeptical. Liam didn't answer right away. He was already thinking, already planning. He knew the rebels would use their old Earth weapons in unconventional ways, hitting where the Vandorian technology was weakest. They wouldn't engage head-on. They would be too clever for that. I don't think it's just about the sword, Liam said finally, his voice low. I think it's about understanding the battlefield. A sword doesn't make you better, it makes you more adaptable. That's the key. And adaptability is what the rebels have. They can shift tactics, use anything around them to their advantage. Tira frowned, but Jorath won't listen to that. He believes that technology will always win. Liam's eyes hardened. Technology isn't everything, but we're about to find out if Jorath's everything can beat the unpredictability of a few human rebels. The next morning, the storm clouds of war loomed over the southern base. The Vandorian military had mobilized. The air was thick with tension, and the high-tech assault vehicles hummed as they lined up, ready for deployment. Liam's mind raced, but he didn't show it. He was a soldier through and through, even though he had been cast aside as a relic. His thoughts weren't on the battle's tactics or the technology at play. They were on one thing, the rebels, the ones who had chosen to fight with Earth's old weapons, and more importantly, how he would prove that the sword wasn't obsolete not by mere strength, but by heart and strategy. Tira once again was beside him, her eyes flicking to the sleek Vandorian ships and the armed troops ready for battle. They're so confident, she murmured. They think they've already won. Confidence alone won't win this, Liam replied. But it might get them too cocky. That's when we'll strike. The squadron moved out, entering the southern jungles where the rebels were believed to be hiding. The landscape was thick with trees and sharp rocks. The sky was a dull gray, as though it too sensed the impending conflict. Suddenly, the quiet of the jungle was shattered by a distant explosion. The sound of gunfire and the crackling of explosions echoed through the dense jungle as Liam and Tira crouched low behind the thick underbrush. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burnt trees and the sharp smell of ozone from the plasma weapons. The rebels had already made their presence known, and they were using the terrain to their advantage. Their guerrilla tactics, stealthy, unpredictable, were turning the Vandorian technology into a liability. Liam adjusted his grip on the hilt of his sword, a comforting weight in his hand. The sword had become more than just a weapon. It was a part of him, a tool for survival. The Vandorians had underestimated it and him. He wasn't the only one here, though. The Vandorian soldiers, armed with the latest technology, moved cautiously through the jungle, rifles ready but their eyes darting nervously at the shadows. The rebels had learned well how to strike in the dark, and they weren't afraid to use anything at their disposal. Tira crouched beside him, her eyes scanning the forest. She was still processing the chaos unfolding around them. They had been sent on what was supposed to be a routine strike against a rebel outpost, but it was clear that this wasn't a normal conflict. The rebels weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting with purpose, with strategy, using everything they had to outsmart the Vandorians. "I don't understand," Tira whispered, her voice tight. "They don't have the tech we do. They shouldn't be able to fight us like this." "They're using what they know," Liam replied quietly. "And what they know is how to adapt. That's what we're not seeing. They don't care about the rules. They care about winning." Another explosion rocked the jungle, and the ground beneath them shook. Through the smoke and debris, the faint outlines of rebel soldiers could be seen moving quickly between the trees, armed with rifles and makeshift weapons. It was clear now, the rebels were no longer the underdogs. They were fighting for something far bigger than their immediate survival. They were fighting to change the course of history. "We need to move," Liam said, his voice urgent. "They're closing in." Tira nodded, her expression conflicted. She had spent her entire career as a soldier under the strict doctrines of the Vandorian military. Technology was everything. Superiority was unquestioned. But now, standing in the midst of the jungle with Liam, she was starting to see the cracks in that worldview. Liam's instincts kicked in as they moved swiftly through the undergrowth. The path was narrow and filled with obstacles, roots, fallen trees, and jagged rocks. Yet Liam navigated the terrain like a shadow, his sword still hanging at his side, but no longer just a tool for combat. It was a symbol of human resilience, a reminder that technology alone couldn't always solve every problem. The rest of the Vandorian squad followed closely behind, but it was obvious that they were out of their element. The rebels weren't fighting a traditional battle. They weren't standing in neat formations or relying on predictable tactics. The rebels knew their land, and they used it against their enemies. Another blast rang out, closer this time. A flash of light cut through the trees, and a Vandorian soldier fell, his armor cracking under the force of the blast. The soldier's screams echoed through the jungle before silence followed. "Cover me," Liam shouted as he leaped forward, pulling out his sword. Tira followed, but it was clear that the Vandorians were losing ground. They were in enemy territory, and the rebels knew the land better than they did. Liam reached the fallen soldier, crouching beside him. The man's eyes were wide with panic, his breath shallow. He was bleeding heavily, but there was no time for a medic. The rebels would be on them in seconds. "Stay with me," Liam said, his voice calm but filled with urgency. He didn't know the soldier's name, but it didn't matter. They were all in this together. The soldier nodded weakly, his rifle barely in his hand. "Help, please," he rasped. Liam's eyes darted around, scanning for a way out. The rebels were closing in, using the smoke and shadows to hide their movements. Liam knew their only chance was to break through the jungle's cover and get back to the Vandorian lines. "Hold on," Liam said, dragging the soldier to his feet. With a grunt, he pushed forward, his sword slicing through the air, clearing their path as they made their way toward the edge of the jungle. But just as they neared the clearing, the sound of a different weapon caught his attention. It wasn't a plasma rifle or a grenade. It was a hum, a whir, something mechanical. Liam's heart skipped a beat. Tira froze beside him, her eyes narrowing as the sound grew louder. "What is that?" she whispered. Before Liam could answer, a massive figure emerged from the jungle, its form towering and mechanical. It was a massive rebel war machine, slower than the Vandorian ships, but deadly in its own right. It was covered in scrap metal, salvaged parts from old Earth tech, and designed to mow down any opponent that dared to face it. Liam instinctively drew his sword, but it wasn't enough. The machine's giant limbs swung, a crude cannon mounted on its shoulder aimed directly at them. "Get down," Liam shouted, pushing Tira to the ground as the rebel machine fired. The shot exploded just above their heads, sending them sprawling into the dirt. Liam's mind raced. The rebels were more prepared than they had thought. This wasn't just a ragtag group of dissidents. This was an army, and they were ready to fight dirty. "We need to take that thing down," Tira said, her voice sharp with determination. She grabbed a weapon from one of the fallen Vandorians and scanned the machine. Liam nodded grimly, his heart pounding in his chest. It's not about brute force, we need to outsmart it. He dashed toward the side, avoiding the machine's sensors. The rebels had built it using old Earth technology, but it was still crude compared to Vandorian tech. There were weak spots in its armor, spots that could be exploited, but only if they acted fast. As he closed in, the machine fired again, but Liam was already moving, his sword flashing in the air. He was within range now, the hum of his blade the only sound cutting through the chaos. Tira was with him, firing her weapon to keep the machine's attention away from him. She was skilled, no doubt about it. But the real advantage lay in Liam's ability to think on his feet, his adaptability. With one swift motion, Liam lunged forward, targeting a vulnerable spot in the machine's side. His sword met the thick plating with a flash of sparks, but it wasn't enough. The blade was heavy, and the material was stronger than he had anticipated. "Focus on the joints," he shouted to Tira, his voice urgent. "We need to disable its movement first." Tira fired again, aiming at the machine's lower joints. The blast struck true, but the machine retaliated, turning to fire on them both. "Move," Liam shouted as he pulled her out of the way, just in time for the blast to hit the ground where they had been standing. The dirt and rock exploded, sending them both tumbling backward. Liam's eyes narrowed as he saw the weak points he needed. This was their only chance. He had to act. The jungle had never seemed so alive and yet so terrifying. The crackling of the burning underbrush, the whirring of broken machinery, and the occasional scream of a fallen soldier filled the air as Liam and Tira scrambled to avoid the oncoming blast of rebel fire. The second machine, an even larger war machine, loomed ahead, its massive frame lumbering through the jungle with mechanical precision. The first one, the one Liam had damaged with his sword, was down, but only temporarily. It struggled to rise, its joints sparking and sputtering, but its focus remained on the human and the Vandorian soldier who had dared to challenge it. However, the appearance of the second machine complicated things. Liam's hand instinctively gripped the hilt of his sword again. His mind raced. This machine was bigger, faster, and armed with advanced weaponry that could obliterate anything in its path. The rebels had clearly upgraded their forces, and what they lacked in technology's refinement, they made up for in sheer force and creative use of Earth's old tech. This was no longer just about fighting back. It was about surviving. "This is insane," Tira muttered under her breath as she readied her weapon, her knuckles white with tension. "They've outgunned us. This thing's a walking fortress." Liam shot her a grim look. He could hear the fear in her voice, fear that he hadn't felt in years, not since his early days of fighting back on Earth. That was the thing about war. It didn't matter if you were using plasma weapons or swords. Fear was universal. "I know," he replied through gritted teeth, trying to steady his breathing. "But it doesn't matter how big they are, it's the same fight. We adapt, and we win." He wasn't sure if he was convincing her or himself, but the words were out there, and they couldn't afford to doubt themselves now. The larger machine had begun advancing toward them, its massive cannon aimed directly at their position. The ground trembled under the sheer weight of its approach. "We need to move," Liam shouted, grabbing Tira's arm. She hesitated but followed his lead as they sprinted through the dense jungle, using trees and rocks as cover. The Vandorian squad had fallen back for the moment, regrouping behind the line of fire, but they were clearly overwhelmed by the enemy's tactics. Another explosion rocked the ground beneath their feet, sending a shower of debris into the air. The rebel machine fired again, the impact of the blast knocking Tira off her feet. Liam grabbed her, pulling her to safety behind a large rock formation. The second machine didn't stop. It was relentless. "I need a plan," Tira panted, her voice shaking. "We're not going to last much longer. That thing will wipe us out." Liam's mind whirred with possibilities. He had one chance to turn the tide. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the machine. There it was, the exposed cooling vent on the side of its torso. It was the only vulnerability he could see, and it wasn't easy to reach. He glanced at Tira. "I need a distraction, keep their attention." She nodded, knowing what had to be done. The Vandorians had their own advanced weaponry, but it wouldn't be enough to destroy the machine. They'd have to do it the hard way, using the terrain, timing, and most importantly, human ingenuity. "Ready?" Liam asked, eyes locking with Tira. "Always," she said, her voice filled with a new determination. Liam gripped his sword tighter. He had been mocked for carrying it, but in this moment he felt the weight of history, of the thousands of warriors who had fought and bled before him. They didn't need advanced weaponry. They needed will. "Go," Liam said, and Tira darted toward the edge of the battlefield, drawing the attention of the machine's sensors. The massive machine shifted, focusing on her movement, its cannon swiveling toward her position. A powerful shot blazed through the air, narrowly missing Tira but forcing her to dive behind a nearby fallen tree. The machine's attention was on her now. This was Liam's chance. He moved quickly, darting through the underbrush, using the chaos as cover. His heart pounded in his chest. He was getting closer to the machine, just a few more yards and he'd be in range. Then a loud crack sounded from the jungle ahead, and Liam froze. The larger machine had begun to charge its secondary weapon, an energy cannon large enough to obliterate anything in its path. The air hummed with power as the cannon began to charge, glowing with a menacing blue light. Liam's pulse quickened. He was running out of time. If he didn't act now, Tira would be caught in the blast, and then the rebels would have won. With a final, desperate sprint, Liam reached the exposed cooling vent of the machine. His sword, now more of a symbol than just a weapon, glowed with the intensity of his focus as he swung it toward the vent. The blade struck, and with a sharp hiss, the machine sputtered. The shot didn't bring the machine down completely, but it created a series of small explosions inside its housing, enough to destabilize its systems. The large machine staggered, its movements slowing as it emitted a high-pitched whine. Liam didn't hesitate. He grabbed a nearby grenade from one of the fallen Vandorian soldiers and tossed it into the exposed vent. Now Liam shouted to Tira. Tira, already a few steps away, ducked as the grenade exploded in the machine's core, sending a shockwave through the air. The larger machine's cannon fired wildly into the sky, but it was too late. The blast tore through the rebel war machine, and with a massive groan, it collapsed to the ground in a pile of twisted metal and sparks. Liam didn't wait to see the aftermath. He grabbed Tira's arm and pulled her away, his eyes scanning the jungle for the next threat. But for now, they had a fleeting moment, of victory. "We're not done yet," Liam muttered, his chest heaving as he scanned the field. There were still rebel forces scattered throughout the jungle, and the Vandorians had yet to fully regroup. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Liam felt a surge of confidence. The jungle fell into a tense quiet after the explosion. The massive rebel war machine, now nothing but a smoldering pile of twisted metal, lay on the ground like a fallen titan. Liam and Tira stood in the shadows of the trees, their chests heaving with the aftermath of their desperate actions. The ground was still vibrating beneath their feet from the force of the blast, but they knew this victory was fleeting. Liam wiped sweat from his brow, his grip still tight on his sword. The fight had taken everything from him. His body ached from the battle, his mind clouded with the weight of what was to come. But his resolve remained firm. He hadn't fought this hard this long, only to fall short now. The rebel army had underestimated them, and for a moment they had made a deadly mistake. Tira, kneeling beside him, exhaled slowly as she surveyed the destruction. Her eyes flicked to Liam's sword, the blade still gleaming in the dimming light. She had seen the power of the weapon firsthand, but now she felt it was more than just a relic. It had been the key to surviving the machine, the key to their victory. "You were right," Tira said, her voice a mixture of awe and uncertainty. "Your sword, it's not just a symbol, is it? It's part of something bigger." Liam met her gaze and nodded, his expression grim. "It's more than a weapon. It's about adaptability, heart, and finding strength when everything else falls apart." The sounds of movement in the jungle broke the moment. Liam's hand instinctively tightened around his sword's hilt, and Tira's rifle was up in an instant. They weren't out of danger yet. The rebels might have lost one war machine, but that was just a piece of their force. Suddenly, Joreth's voice crackled through the comms, sharp and urgent. "Rios, Varus, get back to the perimeter. We're pulling out immediately. They've brought out something worse, and if we don't act quickly, we'll all be wiped out." Liam's heart skipped. Something worse? He didn't need to hear more. He knew that whatever the rebels had planned, it was something even the Vandorians weren't ready for. "Move," Liam barked to Tira, already sprinting toward the edge of the jungle, where the Vandorian soldiers were regrouping. Behind them, the sound of distant explosions and gunfire continued to echo, a constant reminder that the war was far from over. Vandorian command post, outskirts of the battlefield. The command post, an armored building nestled in the trees, was buzzing with activity as Jorath paced the room, his hands clenched into fists. He was no longer the cool, collected commander of the earlier skirmish. The walls of the room were lined with digital maps and status reports, flashing red alerts that indicated the rebel forces had been much more organized than anticipated. "They've been holding back," Jorath growled. "This isn't just an insurgency anymore, it's a well-coordinated army, and they're not using our tech, they've adapted everything they've learned, Earth weapons, rebel forces, and now this. They've got something else." Tira and Liam arrived just as Jorath finished speaking. The command room fell silent as they entered, the soldiers looking at them with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "You both did well out there," Jorath said, his voice surprisingly neutral. "But the real test is still ahead. The rebels are bringing out their final weapon. We need to deal with it before they can deploy it fully." Liam nodded, his eyes sharp as he focused on Jorath. "What kind of weapon are we dealing with?" Jorath's expression darkened, and he gestured to the central map, zooming in on a large area to the south, where the rebel forces had entrenched themselves. A new icon appeared on the screen, an enormous, heavily fortified structure in the middle of the jungle. It wasn't just a base, it was a fortress, capable of withstanding almost any bombardment. "It's called the Titan, a mobile war machine," Jorath explained. "It's unlike anything we've seen. The rebels have scavenged and repurposed Earth's old tech, tank hulls, weapons systems, the works. But the Titan, it's something different. It's part of their last stand. And we need to stop it, or the rebels will sweep through Vandora like a storm." Liam's brow furrowed. "We're facing an enemy that's adapted everything. We're not just fighting soldiers, we're fighting survivors." Jorath's gaze hardened. "And survivors are the hardest enemies to kill. We need a strategy that's unpredictable. That's where you come in, Rios." Liam didn't flinch. "What do you want me to do?" Jorath's lips curled slightly. "The Titan is big, but it's vulnerable, it's slow. Its power sources are unstable, and we can exploit that. I've studied Earth's ancient weapons. There's a flaw in its design, a critical point. If we can disable its power core, the whole thing will go down in minutes." Liam nodded, understanding. "I can help with that." Tira stepped forward, her voice filled with concern. "How? We've seen what they've been able to do. They're not just using weapons. They're using Earth's past, and they know how to fight dirty." Jorath nodded, acknowledging her point. "True, but that's exactly why we need someone who thinks like them. You, Rios, understand Earth's technology better than anyone here. It's time to put that knowledge to use." The room fell into a heavy silence. Liam's eyes drifted back to the map, tracing the path to the Titan. The odds were stacked against them. But he had something the Vandorians didn't, a deep understanding of old tech, of the kind of thinking that could turn the tide of the battle. But even more than that, he had the sword. That old weapon, once thought obsolete, was now more than just a tool. It was his key to survival, to outsmarting a force that relied too heavily on technology. And the rebels, though fierce, were still human, and humans could adapt. "We don't have much time," Liam said finally, his voice steady. "Let's move." Jungle rebel base. The trek through the dense jungle to the Titan was slow, the air thick with humidity and tension. The Vandorian soldiers followed behind Liam and Tira, their movements cautious, their rifles at the ready. The deeper they moved into enemy territory, the more Liam felt the weight of his choice. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting for the future of humanity. As they neared the rebel base, the air grew still. The jungle around them was eerily silent, the sounds of wildlife fading into nothing. It felt like the calm before a storm. Liam's eyes were scanning every movement in the trees, every rustle in the underbrush. His sword was at the ready, but he didn't think it would be enough to stop the Titan. This battle was bigger than anything he'd faced before. "I don't like this," Tira whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. "It's too quiet." "Stay alert," Liam replied. "The Titan is close, they'll have it heavily guarded." And as if on cue, the ground shook beneath their feet. A low, mechanical hum filled the air, followed by the screech of metal grinding. The Titan had come online. The rebels had begun their final assault. Liam's grip tightened on his sword. This was it, the final fight. The Titan loomed before them, a monstrous mechanical beast that seemed to absorb all the light around it. Its sleek, angular form contrasted sharply with the jungle's organic chaos, its massive legs crushing the underbrush beneath it. The ground trembled with every step, and the hum of its energy systems resonated in the air like the growl of a predator. This was no longer just a battle. It was a test of everything humanity stood for. Liam stood at the front of the Vandorian squad, his hand firmly gripping the hilt of his sword. Tira was beside him, rifle ready, her eyes sharp with both fear and resolve. The Titan towered above them, its massive cannon rotating slowly to aim directly at their position. The sheer size of the weapon made Liam's heart race, but it wasn't fear that gripped him now. It was something deeper, an understanding that this battle, above all others, was a fight for more than survival. It was a fight for the heart and soul of humanity. "I told you," Liam muttered under his breath, his voice just loud enough for Tira to hear. "Sometimes it's not about the weapons. It's about using everything you have to fight when the odds are stacked against you." Tira didn't answer at first. She was scanning the Titan, watching its movements, calculating. She had seen this machine in action. She knew what it could do. And yet she still stood beside Liam, ready for whatever came next. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "That thing's a walking fortress. How do we stop it?" Liam's eyes locked on the Titan, and for a brief moment everything else faded away, the soldiers behind him, the battlefield, the endless possibilities of failure. It all came down to this. The sword at his side, the one mocked by the Vandorians and underestimated by the rebels, was the only weapon that could turn the tide. "I can't take it down with my sword," Liam said, his eyes narrowing. "But I can get us close. We just need to reach its weak points. There's a cooling system under the hull, a vent that will send the whole thing into overdrive if we damage it. I'll get there, but I need cover." "Cover?" Tira repeated. "You want me to give you cover while you run straight at it?" Liam's lips twitched into a wry smile. "Pretty much. I know it's crazy, but crazy is all we've got right now. The Titan won't expect us to be this unpredictable." Tira looked at him, her expression unreadable, before nodding. "Fine, let's do it your way." The first shot came from the Titan, a massive blast that tore through the jungle, sending trees flying in all directions. Liam ducked instinctively, pulling Tira down with him as the ground beneath them exploded into dust and debris. The Titan was slow, but its firepower was devastating, and it knew how to use that power to keep them at bay. Every blast made the earth tremble, pushing the Vandorians into retreat. But retreat wasn't an option for Liam. He had a job to do. He had to stop the Titan before it could wipe them all out. "Now," Liam shouted, rising to his feet and charging forward, his sword drawn. The sound of his boots pounding the jungle floor was drowned out by the roar of the Titan's cannon charging up again. He sprinted forward, keeping to the trees and rocks, using the terrain to his advantage. Tira followed closely behind, firing her weapon in short bursts, aiming for weak points in the Titan's armor. Each shot was calculated, but it wasn't enough to stop the machine. The energy shield around the Titan flickered with each blast but remained intact. Liam could feel the weight of the sword in his hand, each step heavier than the last. The distance between him and the Titan shrank, and with every step his mind raced, calculating his every move. The rebels, too, were watching from the shadows of the jungle, waiting for the right moment to strike. He reached the base of the Titan, his heart pounding in his chest. It was massive, almost like a living thing, something made of war, born to destroy. The cool hum of its power systems vibrated through the ground beneath him. The cannon above was aimed directly at him now, and the Titan let out another ominous whine as it charged its weapon. Tira's voice broke through the noise. "Liam, look out." The cannon fired. Liam's heart skipped a beat. He could feel the pulse of the blast as it shot past him, grazing his side and sending him tumbling. The force of the blast sent him skidding through the dirt, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. He pushed himself up, blood trickling down his side, and saw the cooling vent. Just a few feet away, hidden under the massive metal armor of the Titan. With a growl, Liam lunged, using his sword to pry open the vent, his muscles screaming in protest as he shoved the blade into the exposed seam. The Titan roared above him, its systems malfunctioning as sparks flew from the damage. Liam could feel the heat building, but he kept pushing, the weight of the sword in his hands almost comforting now. Suddenly a voice crackled through his earpiece, Jorath's voice, strained and urgent. "Rios, get away from the Titan now, it's going to explode." Liam didn't need any more encouragement. He withdrew his sword and dove backward, rolling to avoid the next blast. The Titan shuddered, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Liam thought he had failed. Then with a violent crack, the Titan's systems overloaded. The cooling vent had done its job. The Titan trembled, and with a deafening explosion, its massive frame erupted in a cascade of sparks and flames. The shockwave pushed Liam and Tira back, sending them both sprawling across the jungle floor. Liam struggled to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. The Titan had fallen, its monstrous frame crumpled on the jungle floor. But as he looked around, his breath caught in his throat. The battlefield was still a chaotic mess. The rebels were retreating, no longer coordinated but still dangerous. But it wasn't the rebels that made Liam's pulse race. It was the sky. Above them, the faint hum of incoming ships filled the air. Vandorian ships, but not just any ships, reinforcements. Jorath's voice crackled again, but this time it was laced with something else. Rios, Varus, get to the extraction point. Now, we need to leave before the next wave arrives. The ground beneath them shook as another explosion, far larger than the Titan's demise, ripped through the jungle. This wasn't over yet. It had just begun. Liam tightened his grip on his sword, the weight of it a steady reminder that, despite everything, they had survived this far. But the question that lingered in his mind was no longer about the Titan. It was about the future. Humanity's place in this galaxy had just been secured, but the battle for respect had only just begun.